The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Kensington Palace as Prince William stood by the grand window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders, and despite his years of royal training, maintaining composure had become increasingly difficult. Kate walked softly into the room, her usually radiant smile absent, replaced by a look of quiet concern that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. The couple had been facing one of the most challenging periods of their marriage and royal duties. The relentless media scrutiny had reached new heights following a series of unfortunate events that had shaken the very foundation of their carefully maintained public image. What started as routine royal engagements had spiraled into a media frenzy that threatened to overshadow their genuine efforts to serve the British people. 3 weeks earlier, during a charity visit to a children's hospital, an innocent moment had been twisted by the press into something far more sinister. William had been photographed comforting a young cancer patient, his hand gently placed on the child's shoulder. The image should have been heartwarming, but a poorly timed second photograph captured what appeared to be tears in his eyes. The headlines that followed were merciless, questioning his emotional stability and fitness for future kingship. Kate had watched helplessly as her husband became the target of unprecedented criticism. The usually supportive British press had turned cold, with commentators suggesting that William's emotional display showed weakness unbefitting a future monarch. Social media exploded with debates about whether the royal family was too detached or too emotional, creating an impossible standard that left both William and Kate feeling trapped. The situation worsened when Kate herself became embroiled in the controversy. During a subsequent public appearance at a veterans' memorial service, she had been visibly moved while listening to stories of sacrifice and loss. Her genuine empathy, once celebrated as a refreshing change in royal demeanor, was now being scrutinized as inappropriate emotional display. The couple found themselves walking an impossible tightrope between human compassion and royal dignity. Their private moments became strained as the pressure mounted. Evening conversations that once brought them comfort now felt heavy with unspoken fears about their future roles and the legacy they would leave for their children. William would pace the palace corridors late at night, his mind racing with doubts about his ability to lead a nation that seemed to question his every gesture. Kate would sit in their private sitting room, staring at newspaper clippings that painted their genuine care for others as a liability rather than an asset. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal week when tabloids began speculating about their marriage stability. Anonymous sources claimed that the pressure was creating rifts between them, suggesting that Kate was struggling to cope with the intensity of royal life. The reports were entirely fabricated, but their impact was real and devastating. For the first time in their relationship, William and Kate began to question whether their love for each other and their commitment to service was enough to weather this storm. Palace advisors recommended they take a step back from public engagements, allowing the media storm to subside. But this retreat only fueled more speculation about their state of mind and commitment to their duties. They found themselves isolated not just from the public, but from the very work that gave their lives meaning and purpose. The irony was painful. Their genuine desire to connect with people and show authentic emotion had become the very thing that threatened to destroy their effectiveness as royals. During this difficult period, their children became their anchor. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis remained blissfully unaware of the media storm surrounding their parents, and their innocent laughter provided moments of reprieve from the constant pressure. William and Kate made a conscious decision to shield their children from the negativity, maintaining normal routines and family traditions despite the chaos surrounding them. The couple's relationship with the palace staff also became strained. Long-serving advisors who had guided them through previous challenges seemed at a loss for how to handle this unprecedented situation. Traditional royal protocol had no playbook for managing criticism of emotional authenticity. Some staff members suggested they adopt a more distant, formal approach to public engagements, while others argued that their humanity was exactly what the modern monarchy needed. As days turned into weeks, William and Kate found themselves increasingly isolated within the very institution they were meant to represent. The palace walls that once provided security now felt like a prison, separating them from the world they desperately wanted to serve. They began to question everything they had been taught about royal duty and whether it was possible to be both authentic and effective in their roles. The strain began to show in small ways. William's usually perfect posture became slightly slumped during private moments. Kate's bright eyes, once sparkling with enthusiasm for their work, now carried a weariness that no amount of makeup could hide. Their communication became careful and measured even in private, as if they feared that showing vulnerability to each other might somehow make the situation worse. Friends and family members noticed the change, but felt helpless to intervene. The unique pressures of royal life meant that even their closest confidants couldn't fully understand the weight they carried. Well-meaning advice from loved ones often felt inadequate in the face of such unprecedented scrutiny and criticism. The couple's faith, which had always been a source of strength, was also tested during this time. They questioned why they were facing such trials when their intentions had always been pure. The God they prayed to seemed distant as they struggled to find meaning in their suffering and direction for their future. Late one evening, as they sat together in their private quarters, both William and Kate finally allowed themselves to acknowledge the depth of their pain. The tears they had held back during countless public appearances finally came, washing over them like a dam finally bursting. In that moment of shared vulnerability, they realized that their greatest strength lay not in their ability to hide their emotions, but in their capacity to support each other through impossible circumstances. This moment of recognition marked a turning point in their approach to the crisis. Instead of trying to meet impossible expectations, they decided to focus on what truly mattered: their love for each other, their children, and their genuine desire to serve others. They began to see that perhaps their critics' inability to appreciate authentic emotion said more about society's fears than about their fitness for royal duty. The morning brought unexpected news that would change everything. Sarah, their longtime private secretary, knocked gently on the door of their breakfast room with an unusually bright expression on her face. She carried a letter that had arrived through special courier, marked with an official seal they didn't immediately recognize. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and bore elegant handwriting that suggested something important and personal rather than the usual formal correspondence they received daily. William looked up from his untouched breakfast, his eyes still carrying the weight of sleepless nights. Kate set down her teacup, her hands trembling slightly as she had grown accustomed to expecting more bad news with each delivery. The past weeks had conditioned them to brace for impact whenever official-looking documents arrived, as they had become synonymous with legal threats from tabloids or formal complaints about their public conduct. Sarah's expression, however, was different this time. Instead of the carefully neutral face she had perfected during the crisis, she wore a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Your Royal Highnesses," she began, her voice carrying an excitement she was trying to contain professionally. "This arrived this morning from St. Catherine's Children's Hospital. The director specifically requested that you read it together, privately, before any staff members were informed of its contents." The hospital name immediately caught their attention. It was the same facility they had visited 3 weeks earlier, where the now infamous photograph had been taken of William comforting the young cancer patient. The visit that had sparked the media storm that nearly destroyed their public image and tested their marriage to its limits. Both William and Kate felt their hearts race, expecting perhaps a formal complaint or legal notice related to their interaction with the patients. Kate reached for the letter with hesitant fingers, her mind immediately racing through worst-case scenarios. Had they somehow violated patient privacy? Had their presence caused distress to families dealing with unimaginable challenges? The weight of responsibility they felt toward every person they met during their duties had become amplified during this crisis, making them second-guess every interaction and gesture. William moved closer to Kate, their shoulders touching as she carefully opened the envelope. The letterhead was simple but elegant, featuring the hospital's logo of a small tree with children's handprints as leaves. As Kate unfolded the paper, they could see it wasn't a formal legal document, but rather a personal letter written in the director's own handwriting, with several smaller notes and drawings attached. The letter began with a warm greeting that immediately set a different tone than they had expected. Dr. Margaret Hughes, the hospital director they had met briefly during their visit, had written not as an administrator dealing with a publicity crisis, but as someone who had witnessed something extraordinary during their time at the facility. Her words were carefully chosen but filled with genuine warmth and gratitude. She described how their visit had impacted not just the children they had met, but the entire hospital community. The young cancer patient William had comforted, a 7-year-old boy named Tommy, had been struggling with his treatment and had become withdrawn and fearful. His parents had been at their wits' end, watching their normally cheerful son become a shadow of his former self as he faced the harsh realities of chemotherapy and surgical procedures. The letter went on to explain how William's genuine emotional response to Tommy's story had been exactly what the child needed. Far from being inappropriate, his visible compassion had given Tommy permission to express his own fears and sadness. In the days following the visit, Tommy had opened up to his medical team about his worries and had begun participating more actively in his treatment plan. Kate's eyes filled with tears as she read Dr. Hughes's description of Tommy's transformation. The boy had started talking about the prince who understood and had told his parents that if Prince William could be brave enough to show his feelings, then maybe it was okay for Tommy to cry sometimes too. This breakthrough had been a turning point in his emotional healing and had positively affected his physical recovery as well. The letter included a drawing Tommy had made, showing himself and William standing together under a rainbow. In childish handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for being sad with me," across the bottom. The simple innocence of the message struck both William and Kate with overwhelming force. Here was proof that their authentic human response had created exactly the connection they had hoped for, even as the media tore them apart for showing genuine emotion. But Tommy's story was just the beginning. Dr. Hughes went on to describe how other children in the hospital had been inspired by the royal visit. A teenage girl with leukemia had started a journal about her feelings after seeing Kate's compassionate response to the family's stories. A young boy with a brain tumor had asked his parents why the newspapers were being mean to the nice prince and princess who had listened to him so carefully. The hospital staff had also been profoundly affected by William and Kate's visit. Nurses reported feeling renewed purpose in their work after witnessing how much the royal couple genuinely cared about each patient's individual story. Dr. Hughes herself admitted that their authentic emotional engagement had reminded her why she had chosen to work with sick children in the first place. As they continued reading, William and Kate discovered that their visit had sparked a movement within the hospital. Families had begun sharing their stories more openly with each other, creating support networks that hadn't existed before. The emotional honesty that William and Kate had modeled had given others permission to be vulnerable and seek help when they needed it. The most surprising part of the letter revealed that several major donors had increased their contributions to the hospital after seeing news coverage of the visit. Contrary to the negative media spin, many people had been moved by the genuine compassion they witnessed and wanted to support the facility that was clearly making a real difference in children's lives. The hospital had received its largest single donation in history from a businessman who had been touched by the authentic care he saw in the photographs. Dr. Hughes concluded her letter with an invitation that would change everything for William and Kate. The hospital was opening a new wing dedicated to family support and emotional wellness, directly inspired by the positive impact of their visit. They wanted to name it the Compassionate Care Center, and were requesting that William and Kate return for the official opening ceremony. More importantly, the letter included dozens of messages from patients, families, and staff members who wanted to thank them personally for their genuine kindness and emotional availability during one of the most difficult times in their lives. Each note was handwritten and filled with specific memories of how William and Kate's presence had brought comfort and hope during dark moments. As they finished reading, both William and Kate sat in stunned silence. The stark contrast between the media narrative and the actual impact of their visit was overwhelming. While newspapers had criticized them for showing too much emotion, the people they had actually served were grateful for their authentic human response to suffering and pain. Kate looked at William, seeing her own mixture of relief and vindication reflected in his eyes. The tears they had held back for weeks finally came. But this time they were tears of joy and gratitude rather than pain and frustration. They had been so focused on the criticism that they had lost sight of the real purpose of their work, connecting with people and making a genuine difference in their lives. The realization that their authentic compassion had created exactly the impact they had hoped for was both liberating and overwhelming. They had been right to trust their instincts about showing genuine emotion and care, even when it made them vulnerable to criticism. The people they served didn't want perfect, emotionless figures. They wanted real human beings who could understand and share in both their struggles and their triumphs. The decision to return to St. Catherine's Children's Hospital felt both daunting and necessary. William and Kate spent the following days preparing for what would either mark their triumphant return to public life or potentially expose them to even more criticism. The palace communications team worked carefully to manage expectations, but privately, everyone understood that this visit would determine the future direction of their public service approach. On the morning of their return visit, Kate stood before her mirror, choosing her outfit with more care than usual. She selected a soft blue dress that conveyed both professionalism and warmth, avoiding anything that might seem too formal or distant. William adjusted his tie nervously, his mind racing through possible scenarios and outcomes. They had agreed to face whatever awaited them together, but the butterflies in their stomachs reminded them how much was at stake. The drive to the hospital was unusually quiet, both lost in their own thoughts about what they might encounter. Would the media be waiting with the same hostile energy that had characterized recent coverage? Would the hospital staff feel awkward about the controversy that had surrounded their previous visit? Most importantly, would they be able to maintain the authentic emotional connection that had proven so meaningful while also protecting themselves from further criticism? As their car pulled into the hospital grounds, they were surprised to see not the usual crowd of aggressive photographers, but instead a modest gathering of genuinely curious onlookers and hospital supporters. The atmosphere felt different, less predatory, and more hopeful. Staff members who had gathered to greet them wore expressions of genuine pleasure rather than the carefully neutral faces they had grown accustomed to during recent public appearances. Dr. Hughes met them at the entrance with a warmth that immediately put them at ease. Her smile was genuine and welcoming, and she thanked them sincerely for accepting the invitation to return, despite the media storm that had followed their previous visit. She led them through the hospital corridors, past familiar rooms where they had first met the children who had changed their perspective on their royal duties. The first stop was Tommy's room, and both William and Kate felt their hearts racing as they approached the door where everything had changed. Dr. Hughes knocked gently and announced their arrival, and they heard an excited young voice call out for them to enter. What they found inside exceeded their wildest hopes and expectations. Tommy was sitting up in bed, his face bright with excitement and his eyes sparkling with health that hadn't been present during their previous visit. His parents stood nearby with tears of joy in their eyes, and the entire room felt filled with an energy of hope and healing that was almost tangible. The contrast with their previous encounter was striking and wonderful. The young boy immediately began chattering about his recovery progress, showing them the drawings he had made and telling them about the other children he had befriended since their last visit. His parents explained that Tommy's turnaround had begun the day after William and Kate's visit, when he had finally been able to express his fears and concerns about his treatment. This emotional breakthrough had led to better cooperation with his medical team and more effective treatment outcomes. But the most touching moment came when Tommy presented them with a handmade card signed by dozens of children throughout the hospital. The cover featured a rainbow drawn in crayon with the words, "Thank you for caring about us," written in various childish handwritings. Inside were personal messages from children of all ages, thanking them not for being perfect royal figures, but for being real people who understood that being sick and scared was okay. As they continued their tour of the new Compassionate Care Center, William and Kate encountered story after story of positive change that had been inspired by their previous visit. A teenage patient had started a support group for other young cancer patients after being moved by Kate's willingness to listen to difficult stories. A young mother had begun volunteering at the hospital after witnessing how much the royal visit had meant to her daughter. The nursing staff shared how the visit had changed their approach to patient care, encouraging them to be more emotionally present with families during difficult times. Several nurses mentioned that seeing William's emotional response had given them permission to show their own compassion more openly, leading to stronger relationships with patients and families. The most surprising revelation came from Dr. Hughes herself, who explained that the hospital had received inquiries from other medical facilities wanting to implement similar approaches to emotional wellness and family support. The model of authentic, compassionate care that William and Kate had demonstrated was being studied and replicated across the healthcare system. As they moved toward the formal opening ceremony for the new center, both William and Kate felt a profound shift in their understanding of their royal roles. The criticism they had endured suddenly seemed less important than the real, measurable impact their authentic approach had created. They realized that trying to be perfect had been less effective than simply being genuine and caring. The ceremony itself was intimate and meaningful rather than grand and formal. Children from the hospital presented them with flowers they had grown in the hospital garden, and families shared brief testimonials about how the royal visit had affected their healing journeys. There were tears, but they were tears of gratitude and joy rather than pain and struggle. When it came time for William and Kate to speak, they made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Instead of delivering carefully scripted remarks designed to avoid controversy, they spoke from their hearts about what they had learned from the children and families at the hospital. They acknowledged that showing emotion had been criticized, but affirmed their commitment to authentic compassion in their public service. Kate spoke about how the children at St. Au's Catherine's had taught her that vulnerability was not weakness, but rather the foundation of genuine human connection. William shared how his interaction with Tommy had reminded him that being moved by others' struggles was not inappropriate but essential for effective leadership and service. The response from the gathered crowd was overwhelmingly positive. Parents nodded in agreement as they spoke about the importance of emotional honesty in dealing with life's challenges. Hospital staff applauded their commitment to maintaining authentic relationships with the people they served. Even the small group of media representatives present seemed moved by the genuine nature of their remarks. As the ceremony concluded, William and Kate were invited to visit a special room that had been prepared as part of the new center. Dr. B. Hughes led them down a corridor they hadn't seen before, stopping at a door marked with a simple plaque reading "The Hope Room." She explained that this space had been designed specifically for families who needed a quiet place to process difficult emotions and support each other during challenging times. When she opened the door, both William and Kate gasped in surprise and immediately felt tears welling up in their eyes. The walls were covered with artwork created by current and former patients, each piece depicting hope, healing, and gratitude. But what moved them most was a large display case containing hundreds of letters and cards from families who had been affected by their previous visit. The centerpiece of the display was Tommy's original rainbow drawing, now professionally framed and accompanied by a plaque explaining how one moment of authentic compassion had sparked a movement of emotional healing throughout the hospital. Surrounding it were thank you notes, recovery milestones celebrated by families who felt supported by the royal visit, and even wedding announcements from couples who had met in the hospital's new family support groups. One wall featured a timeline showing the positive changes that had occurred in the months following their visit: decreased patient anxiety levels, improved family satisfaction scores, increased volunteer participation, and record-breaking fundraising success. The evidence was overwhelming that their decision to show genuine emotion had created exactly the kind of positive impact they had always hoped their public service would achieve. As they stood together in that room, surrounded by tangible proof of how their authentic compassion had transformed lives, both William and Kate felt a profound sense of vindication and purpose. The tears they had held back for so long finally flowed freely, but these were tears of joy, gratitude, and renewed determination to continue serving with genuine hearts rather than perfect facades. The journey back to the palace that evening was filled with quiet reflection and renewed hope for their future service. They had learned that criticism from those who didn't understand their mission was far less important than the lives they could touch through authentic compassion and emotional availability. The surprise behind that hospital room door had revealed not just the impact of their work, but the true meaning of their calling as public servants who could make a real difference by simply being genuinely human.